Hi, and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host. It's been a little break since we've seen you last time, but we're right back at it. It's a new year and a lot of exciting stuff to look at in the topic of cities and how they work. Today, we've got a great subject, which is of great interest to me. It's cities in literature. And to help us understand that and unpack a lot of what's involved with that, we are joined by Theo Theoharis, who has taught literature at Harvard since 1985. And we're going to dig into the subject right now. Theo, welcome to Unplanned.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And I have taken a few classes from you as an adult student, and they have all been wonderful. I'm trying to remember exactly which ones I took, but most recently I just took Ulysses, which was James Joyce's great masterwork. And you walked us through Ulysses. And I thought at that time, well, you would be the perfect person to help us unpack where cities fit in, let's just say, Western literature. Now, I know you go way back to the Greeks and the Romans and all that, so you can pick your spot, but I want you to help us understand how we should think about cities when we think about books.
Sure. I'd be very happy to do that. If you want to start with the Greeks and the Romans, there are two foundational texts, and they're related to each other. The first one is Homer's Iliad, which is not properly a text. It was eventually a text. It was a series of sung, chanted, interconnected stories of how Troy fell. The second one is the Aeneid, which is the story of how Aeneas brought Troy to Italy, reestablished it as the new Troy, which place eventually became Rome.
Well, those are obviously foundational texts.
There's where we start.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was a city in the world, late Bronze Age?
Right.
1200 BC. It was basically, in the case of Troy and many other places that are presumed to have been like Troy, because these places all were wiped out at that period, right?
Mm.
Crete, Troy, a number of other places, all the major cities of the Mediterranean basin were destroyed, and no one knows why or how. System failure, disease, whatever it was. But they were all gone within 100 years, right?
Mm. Wait, just clarify that. You're saying all of these different cities basically died out within a 100-year time frame.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Boom, no more.
Interesting.
And the Iliad is the story of how Troy got destroyed by war.
Right.
There's one major difference in the city of Troy, which got repeated over and over and over from anything that we think of as a modern city. Troy was a walled city.
Right. And I'm just going to put you on notice that we're not going to spend our whole time back with the Greeks and the Romans.
But Troy was a walled city.
Right.
And the city of Troy was essentially the palace of Priam, the king, and then all the other palaces he built for all his sons and all the families of those loyal to him inside the city.
Right.
So essentially, you should imagine a kind of gated community.
Right.
That was an ancient city.
Right.
And it was also a kingdom.
Right. Now, how
it was a kingdom. So the Greeks, the Greeks burn it down
right.
at the end of the Iliad. Aeneas is left alive,
Right.
and he's charged by Aphrodite and other powers to take the household gods from his house in Troy, because he's a crony of Priam's.
Yeah.
And he's a descendant of a god,
Right.
son of Anchises and the goddess Aphrodite. So he's required to continue Troy.
Yeah.
He's told, travel to Italy, but it wasn't Italy then, travel west to Latium, where he goes. He founds the new city by fighting against the people who are there.
Right.
And that becomes Troy, New Troy,
Right.
which then is named Rome. Now, in Book 6 of the Aeneid, he goes to the underworld, imitation of Book 6 of the Odyssey.
Right.
And he talks to all these different people. And he talks to somebody who tells him the future history of Troy, bringing it up to Augustus in the first century.
All right. But I don't want to get too... Yeah.
The point of that is Augustus commissioned Virgil to write that poem. He gave cultural authority to the city of Rome and its power to rule the world.
Interesting.
So cities in the ancient world are moral, cultural, economic, political, organized resources and authority of civilization. Dante, great poet, great political theoretician, all of this stuff. Dante's kicked out of the city through a subterfuge induced by the Pope. He then wanders the rest of his life from here to there, patron to patron,
Right.
writing about all the varieties of damnation, recovery, and bliss in the Divine Comedy.
And you can...
Hell is a city.
Hell is a city. In the Divine Comedy, hell is...
Divine Comedy, it's thought of as a city. It's a big funnel.
Interesting.
Heaven is the city of God,
Right.
taken over from Augustine. And purgatory is a mountain which you climb up out of hell to get to the city of God. So damnation and bliss are cities
Interesting.
in Dante. And so that idea of, now what is central always to the idea of city, from Homer straight through to Joyce and beyond, is masses of people in one place sharing resources with a certain amount of leisure. The benefit of a city is you do not have to grow your own food. You do not have to kill your own cattle. You do not have to make your own wine. The requirements of staying alive are provided en masse to be purchased.
Right.
That combines the leisure of the purchaser with the labor of the producer of the goods. So, right? So
Yeah.
all the food is brought in from outside.
Right. Right.
The stuff you need, the houses and the clothing, all that's made on the inside.
Right.
And then you have a servant class and all the rest.
Right.
So basically, the city is a highly centralized economic use of resources that generates efficiency and leisure. And
Right.
in the leisure time,
Right.
you can go to the theater, you can read books, you can do all of that. And a city requires mass numbers of people for the efficiency to be enacted and worth it.
Yeah.
I remember I was in Berkeley when I was a graduate student. I was walking around and I thought, oh, okay. So I was an usher at the Opera House in San Francisco at that point. And I thought, oh, okay, so there are a couple of thousand seats at the Opera House. There have to be 2,000 people within an hour of the Opera House who have the money and the time to go to the opera tonight. how many people do there have to be here so that randomly 2,000 people can go to the opera? That's true for the racetrack, the movie theater. So the surplus population generates the activities of culture.
So we've now covered about 1,500 years of Western culture. Walk us into the more modern era, which you can define at any point, wherever modern world, because there's so many.
For literature, you have to start with Dickens, right?
Right.
The great Renaissance city writers.
Right.
Shakespeare, of course, in London.
Right. Right.
Ben Jonson.
Right.
In London. They tended to be playwrights, right? The other issue in the Renaissance, of course, is that for the first time, cities are routinely international.
Yeah.
Every day.
And meaning
every day there's trade, right?
Right.
So every day there are, 500 to 1,000 new people from Italy, Spain, in London.
Right. Right.
Or Marseille.
Right.
Or the other port capitals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Right.
Cities then take on an international flavor.
Yeah.
And a cosmopolitan character, right?
Right.
As opposed to the countryside, where if you show up in the countryside and you don't speak the language of the country.
Right. Yeah.
You can't function.
Right.
If you show up in the city and you don't speak the language, we can find somebody who will interpret for you. You can function very well.
Right. Right.
You can change money. You can do all kinds of things.
Right.
So cities become almost neurotransmitters by the time of the Renaissance.
Right.
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 And they are certainly that in Dickens. Now, in terms of literature, Dickens is the first one not to be interested in governance, politics, economics, and justice as those things occur or do not occur in the city, or occur well or badly in the city. But he's the first one in English to have made it a major concern. He's the first one with a political agenda, and he is the first one whose political agenda is protest against an elimination of the abuses that the poor and the working class suffer to provide the leisure for the upper classes in the city. And
you're saying, as you look across literature of, I assume, of that time, because we're also talking about the industrialization of society.
Precisely, and this is what brought about the ills,
Right.
In Christmas Carol.
Right.
Scrooge says about why he won't give money to the workhouses, prisons, workhouses, to these two guys who are asking him for money. I support, are there no prisons, are there no workhouses? And the two gentlemen say, many would rather not go there, many would rather die. Scrooge answers, if they would rather die, let them die and decrease the surplus population. That's Malthus. And Malthus' great book in the middle of the 19th century about the problem of overpopulation, too many people in the city. So right there in the middle of A Christmas Carol, 43, I think it is.
1843.
1843.
Right.
There's Dickens putting
Right.
in the middle of this Christmas story.
Right.
Sociology,
Right.
political economy.
Right.
So he was right in the midst of it. And the issues for him were no toilets in the houses, filth, blah, all of that kind of daily life anguish and abuses that not only harmed but killed the poor.
So
he writes that. He writes that in a number of books.
Right. And is this, I mean, in my mind,
the person closest to Dickens in the modern world, in my mind, has always been Bono.
Bono.
Right? Bono, no more AIDS. Bono, no more this, no more that.
Right.
Bono, the great humanitarian agitator for assistance
Interesting.
On the basis of his artistic popularity and his charisma with audiences who loved him.
Right. Now, how does the city itself play a role as character in the storytelling of these people? Because to me, that's always been a wonderful aspect, particularly in, say, 20th century film, where the city becomes a character. It almost plays a role.
Well, Rossellini.
Yeah. And I think of...
that's the title of the movie he wrote about the entry of the American, of Clark's army into Rome. It's called Roma Città Aperta, open city. Rome, open city.
Right.
And that's what he called the movie, right? Liberated city.
Right.
So, and, he just films all the districts and everything going on in the city.
Right.
And so forth. City as a character, meaning city as an agent in the action. City as the protagonist of the action. It is the protagonist of the action in that film. And in many ways, it is a kind of ghostly protagonist in Ulysses. Because Ulysses is the story of two men.
We're talking about James Joyce.
James Joyce's
Right.
Ulysses.
Right.
Ulysses is the story of two men trapped in their neuroses or their anguish or their suffering. One who believes he has killed his son, right? Bloom, his son dies when he's 9 days old. Bloom thinks he died because Bloom, had bad sperm. Right? Can't produce a healthy child. And he's wrecked his marriage as a result of that for the last 10 years. Stephen's mother has died.
Stephen Dedalus, by the way.
Stephen Dedalus, his mother has died. So Bloom's 38. Stephen is 22. Stephen is the position of Telemachus from the Odyssey. Bloom is the Odysseus of the Odyssey. Odysseus has to get his house in order, get back home. Telemachus needs a father. Stephen thinks he's killed his mother. He's terribly guilty. He can't become the writer he wants to be. He's been dragged back from the city of Paris, the city of light, to this third-rate city, Dublin, which he now has to function in and can't function in because of his trauma, his guilt, his paralysis. So these two guys are in a very bad shape, both of them. The novel takes place on one day. During the course of that day, these two randomly meet. They have a very slim personal history, very, very slim.
Right.
Bloom knows Stephen's father, Simon, whom Stephen is on bad terms with. Bloom has seen Stephen twice. When Stephen was 5 years old, once, without speaking to him, and when Stephen was 10 years old, where he did speak to him. Bloom's Jewish, Stephen is not, etc.
Right. It's a weird setting in a lot of ways.
Stephen has only a dim idea who Bloom is. He's one of the people his father speaks contemptuously of, right? By accident, they cross each other's paths in the city, and Bloom makes the most of those random encounters to create a relationship with Stephen, which Stephen tolerates for various reasons, and then breaks off. But in the course of the day, from 10 to 2 in the morning, they have a series of very intense encounters. Those encounters break the mental prison doors open in both of them. Because of those encounters, Bloom can now think differently about the fact that he has no son. Because he gets to act toward a father, as a father towards Stephen. Stephen thinks differently about his future because Bloom actually takes him seriously on the terms in which Stephen wishes to be taken seriously, and is not taken seriously by everybody. In fact, is mocked for believing in by everybody. Namely, that he can be an important writer who will contribute to the welfare of Dublin and Ireland.
Well, let's turn to Dublin now, because part of the genius of this book,
the point I want to make there is the city is a protagonist because it is the city's random mixing of its inhabitants as they are going about their procuring of resources and their leisure. Only a city brings that degree of randomness. In a village, you will see everybody every day. You will know what they want to talk about, etc. In a city, you can meet people who are strangers or virtual strangers. And under the right circumstances, they can change your life. And that's how the city is protagonist in Ulysses.
Now, walk us. So we've touched on some of the major works, major writers of about 2,000 years of Western culture. Walk us into the 20th century, if you.
Philip Roth, Newark.
Really? Well, tell us more.
Philip Roth. I grew up in Orange and South Orange, New Jersey.
Right.
Streets in my town in South Orange and the town itself figure in Roth's novels. The whole of Essex County figures in Roth's novels. Roth's papers are now at the Newark Public Library. Roth details city life in Newark from the point of view of second and third generation Jews and the Jewish neighborhoods and the questions of assimilation, not assimilation, all of that, and the interaction with Christians, and all of that. So religion, culture, economics, art, marriage, customs, food, all of it as it happens in Newark, and the satellites of Newark, Irvington, all these other places. There's no Philip Roth without the urban environment.
Tell us, just because I have only...
So I read Philip Roth.
No, well, I was going to say...
I've written on Roth, and I'm like the kid who sees himself on television. Right? Oh, that's me up there, right? Right? And that's one of the pleasures of writing the city novel for the city dwellers. Yeah. Right? Their story is being told to everybody else and to them at the same time. So they get fame, notoriety, acknowledgement. Right.
Now, let me ask you this, because there's so much. I mean, I would love to delve into a specific novel, but I think in the interest of the broad scope of all that we're covering here, so Roth was writing when? In the 50s, 60s?
Through the 80s.
Through the 80s.
And even up until, I don't know, 2000 something. Right?
Okay. But where are we now? So this show, and I say this on many, many episodes of this show, was started because of COVID. Basically, I was at home. I'm interested in cities. It seemed like the perfect time. And we were sort of running this huge experiment in cities where we just shut down an entire city or cities around the world for more than a day. So all of a sudden you could see a lot was revealed about cities and how they actually function, both intentionally and unintentionally. And I thought, well, that's a perfect time to just dive into the subject. Where do you think we are as it relates to cities, but not cities per se, but cities as people are observing them, chronicling them, writing about them? What's the state of play as you look at it, pre-COVID, COVID, and now as we're coming out of COVID?
A different population is now emerging as the most how how shall I put it, the most popular and the most important topic for city novelists, right? So as the working middle class.
Can I just say, I'm going to interrupt you for a sec. We didn't touch on the 80s novel. That's sort of that 1980s go, go, go. Who was that New Yorker, Jay McInerney?
Yeah, Bright Lights,
Big
Cities. Jay and I went to college together.
Oh, really?
I know. I knew Jay. We were friends at Williams.
Yeah.
And he went to Syracuse, and Raymond Carver was his mentor.
Yeah. And then what did he go to New York City and just
went to New York City. That was his first big book.
Yeah.
That was about the boy comes to the city and, the end of naivete, the gaining of experience. That was, of course, the subject of half a dozen Balzac novels.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Even Great Expectations has that.
Yeah.
And certainly Thackeray's novel about Becky Sharp, Vanity Fair,
right,
is all about.
Right.
She can never be called. Let me start that sentence again. She was never properly naive,
right,
Becky.
Right.
But the city certainly made her sharper than she ever was. So the story of the boy who comes to the city, that Jay was writing, has a long pedigree.
In
European and American literature. Right.
But it did seem like a novel of the time at the same time,
It was all about the innocently corrupting powers of the city, right? It was about that combination of the ruinous draw of experience,
right,
and the maturing draw of the vices of the city,
right,
and that kind of thing. So that's a constant topic,
right,
of the city versus the country. For modern Americans, in literature, the country is almost always the suburbs, right. They now function. They do the work that the countryside used to do. Right. There are still novels about people from Paducah who go to Louisville in Kentucky. Bobby Ann Mason of the 70s and 80s wrote about that. But not as much as it was the case in the 18th and 19th century. Yeah. Now it's the people from South Orange, or the people like Jay from a suburb. Right. That novel, a suburb who goes to the city. Right. Or a Midwesterner who comes to the city. Well,
I also think of all those sort of John Cheever types and all that.
John Cheever. And Updike. And
all that, yeah. But I interrupted you because you were reflecting on where we are at the sort of point end, sharp end we are right now.
And it's not the glitterati white crowd from the 80s. Right. It's going to be Black, Hispanic, Asian, not exclusively underclass, but very often that.
Right.
And their experience of city life.
Yeah.
And their contribution to their culture, to the leisure, their achievements, their suffering in the place where the struggle for resources is governed by a set of systematic social orders that's much more complex and oppressive than the systematic social orders of a village. Yeah. And so that's very often the subject of the new novel, of the current novel.
Yeah. And it does raise...
And also a lot more women, right?
Right. Yeah.
A lot more of the problem of women in this world, in that environment, in our current city environment.
Right. And
and also varieties of sexual nonconformists.
Right.
So there's a push toward and a high prominence of the disenfranchised people who are still functioning in the city. but who are systematically disenfranchised by the social and economic structures by which the city runs, successfully for some.
Right.
And that's a absolutely standard topic now.
Right. Presumably the sum is a fairly small group of people.
The city as a center more of injustice than justice.
Right.
So the Dickens theme of the injustice of the city has been ramped up.
Right. Right.
Heavily now.
Right. And do you think, I mean, Dickens might have been a standalone person in his time, but these are fairly common themes today and probably much more broadly felt, that writers maybe need to write more about this injustice question than maybe during Dickens' time. I don't know. But
and Dickens wrote about this once he was successful.
Right.
Dickens is essentially a comic novelist, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of novels that aren't comic, but his genius is comedy.
Right.
And this is not a comic topic.
Right. All right. Your closing question, and before I do that, I just want to say thank you for joining us on Unplanned. And I would love to explore more books. We just touched on Ulysses. There's obviously so much in there, but there are so many other authors, say William Shakespeare, for example. But your closing question is this, and it's a bit of a setup question. I am more and more, I grew up roughly age contemporary, same generational sort of touch points as you. And the written word was everything. And the published word was everything. I now feel more and more that the video word, the recorded word, is taking preeminence. So, is the novel dead in this world of hyper connectivity, always online, always viewing stuff as opposed to reading stuff?
If dead means no longer the primary artistic representation of the culture to itself in narrative, no. I wouldn't say dead. I would say retired.
To return or just retired? It's
retired meaning no longer getting a paycheck, no longer working, no longer providing that service. But there are people who are retired who still work, right? Who still do stuff, so I think it's in that position.
Right.
I don't think it's extinct.
Right.
When dead means extinct, there will never be another one. No.
Right.
Clearly not.
Right.
Right. Because people are reading. But is the novel what it was when Roth was writing? No.
Right.
Will it ever be again? I have no idea.
Right.
I can't tell. My guess is probably not.
Right.
Because before the novel, the theater was the place where people went to do this. That's why Shakespeare got rich.
Right.
Before TV, the movies is where people went. TV still has the greatest power over people, but now everything is on TV, and it's all curated by the most extravagantly individual tastes available.
Yeah.
Right? You can just get whatever you want all day long. When I was a little boy, I used to think, as I sat there in front of the TV set, watching Laurel and Hardy, Chuck McCann, Channel 11, After School, or Abbott and Costello, or Million Dollar Movie, Land of the Pharaohs, which I adored, right? I would think, I wish these were like records and I could just put them on whenever I wanted to. I had that thought when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
Right? And so now that's where we are.
Yeah.
Right? The world now is super saturated with narrative in a way that it wasn't when I was a kid.
Yeah.
The novel was a way of saturating the world with narrative. So was the theater. So were the movies. But now you can stay up all day, day after day. You can never leave your house.
Yeah.
and you can watch stories all the time.
Yeah.
That kind of access, no other medium is going to be able to do that.
Well, with that, Theo Theoharis, I just want to thank you again for joining us on
I'm
Unplanned.
delighted to have been here.
And let's see if we can get you on again. We'll talk about some more topics. But
I'd be very happy to
it's
come back.
just been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.